Hey yo, everyone, gather round. It's story time. Brought to you by the University of Alaska Fairbanks, Department of Social Work, and a Conscious Party Productions. You are listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast.
A conscious party.
Revolutionizing our minds.
Elevating our consciousness.
Changing our worlds.
Your story.
My story.
Our story.
All right. Welcome to another episode of The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. I'm your host, as always, Christian Ace Stettler, and I'm very happy to be joined by Michon this morning. How are you, Michon?
I'm good. It's a good morning, a good Saturday. It's just good for it to be Saturday.
Yeah. How's the weather down in Anchorage?
It felt really chilly this morning. I actually don't know what the actual temperature is, but it felt really chilly when I woke up. Let's see. The temperature is my phone's not loading. It felt chilly. No snow. And there's snow on the ground, but it's not snowing.
No snow. Yeah, I've heard some horror stories about the weather in Anchorage, just all the snow and then it melting and freezing and snowing some more. But here in Fairbanks, it's a beautiful morning, as you can see behind me. The sunrise is beautiful. It's a little colder than it's been, which is weird to say because I think the last time I recorded an episode, it was in the 50 below zero territory. And so just to add context, it was like 55 below here was the lowest in Fairbanks about 10 days ago or so. And then the next week, which was this past week, it got up to like 46 at my house. So it's like a 100-degree turnaround. I never experienced anything like that in my life. And if you'd have told me last week that, you know, the snow would be melting at my house off all the trees, I'd have told you were crazy when it was 50 below zero. Like the inside of my windows were frozen last week, and now everything's thawed out, so it's crazy. All right. Well, no worries. So, yeah, Fairbanks, it's been cold, it's warm, and now it's a little, what I meant to say was that now it's a little colder again. It's like 0 degrees, -2, I think, said on the drive over here. So much better than -50, but that 40-degree weather was nice for while it lasted. But it's my family's first time up here in this kind of weather, and I kept telling them, don't get used to it. It's like a fall spring. It will get cold again, I promise.
It changes so dramatically. For a long time, I feel like we had no snow for a while, and it was very warm. And then like 2-3 years ago, the snow is nonstop.
Yeah, I was amazed. I saw like a friend's picture on Facebook, and they were showing like the snow on their roof, and it was a lot. I mean, it was a lot. But yeah, so you're an LCSW in Anchorage, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how long have you been in LCSW?
I got my license in what year was it? 2020. So
2020.
4 years now.
Yeah, right on. Well, I can tell you, so just to give some context, I met Michon, and we're both PhD students in the Indigenous Studies program here at UAF. And I was very excited. We had 3 of us social workers in that class that we had last semester. And that was exciting because usually when I've stepped out of the realms of social work, you know, there's not many of us out there in those spaces. And so, you know, there's nobody that really empathizes with the social work side of things. And so I was really happy about that. And I'm also excited to have you here to talk on the podcast. So you have these TikTok videos you're making, right?
Yeah.
I thought before we share the video, we could talk just a bit about TikTok because it's something that's kind of still esoteric for me. I've never really been on TikTok. I have my wife she shares some stuff on there once in a while, and she'll show me videos. And of course they come up on TikTok videos come up on like Instagram and Twitter and stuff sometimes, but I just really haven't delved into it too much. I feel like I'm too old for it, and maybe I'm wrong there. But how do you use TikTok?
Let's see. I started getting into using TikTok in 2022. So that was 2 years ago. And I felt old too. I was like, I thought I'd never get into it, but I ended up getting into it. And find that TikTok is a really great resource. I mean, you got to sift through the stuff because some things are untrue and stuff. But um, I I think it depends on what you're looking for. Some people say they don't like it because they get a lot of negativity, but I haven't had that experience. I actually, on my TikTok, I get a lot of great teachers on there telling their story and other people going through difficulties and how they're handling it and finding wellness. So it's been a great resource for me and a great resource for my healing process too, because I would listen to a lot of stories on TikTok. I feel like I have so many mentors all over the world because of TikTok and podcasts, but they don't know it.
That's It's true, and that's one of the beautiful things. I think one of the bad things with how much stuff is out there these days, you know, how many resources, is that we are like oversaturated, so it can be hard to like you said, sift through so many, like there's millions of podcasts out there now. But on the other hand, you know, like it's out there, and you know, the people are out there, and there's whatever you need can be found somewhere, most likely.
Right.
How long are TikTok videos? Like under a minute?
They're about 3 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes,
3 minutes.
I think usually
Okay.
is what they try to keep it at. At least the ones I've made are about that long. Yeah,
Oh,
and I
okay.
really enjoy using TikTok to share my story. Um, I've learned I have a passion for digital storytelling, and so that's what kind of got me into TikTok was first seeing other people do it, sharing their stories and when I got into TikTok, I was actually in a really hard time, a hard place in my life. So listening to those stories really helped me get through the stresses that I was going through. And then I was like, hey, I can do that. I can tell my stories. Like I realized how powerful my stories can be, especially if I work on healing them and work on healing the wounds behind the stories. And then sharing that with the world through TikTok
Yeah.
and
What would you
YouTube.
say is it? What is digital storytelling?
Ooh, I think it's a way to tell your story to a broader audience. It's a resource we have now in this time that we're in to use to get to a broader audience about what we need to share. That's my
Yeah.
opinion.
One of the cool things too, you know, with all the technology these days is just being able to record these things and to preserve them, I guess I should say. Whether you're talking to an elder or whether you're sharing your own story, it's preservation, you know. When I look back at, because I've done a lot of work in ancestry and stuff, you know, it's really hard to come by anecdotes and things from back then. But now we have the ability to preserve these things, you know, to teach other people, but also for our children and what comes after, you know what I mean? I think that's cool.
Really
Well,
cool.
you have a video that we want to share. You want to introduce us to it before I pull it up?
Sure. Yeah. So I created this video as a part of a assignment actually for Indigenous Studies. It was we were taking the education class. It was about Indigenous education, and we had a part of our one of our assignments was an oral narrative. And so I created this story as a part of that class, but also as a kind of a precursor to my research because it really highlights why I'm doing this work and yeah, it tells my story as to why I'm getting into this work, and it really is a focal point in my research for the PhD program.
Okay, well, let's check it out.
To my daughter, it all started with you. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was motionless and exhausted. The doctors were doing tests on you. When you heard my voice, you turned your head to me, and the doctor said, "She's looking for her mama." I'll never forget that moment. The doctor placed you on my chest, and you were mine. You wasted no time to breastfeed. You latched on immediately. I'm writing this letter to express my gratitude. You changed my life. That moment we first laid eyes on each other, the world disappeared, and it was just you and me. You gazed longingly at me like I was pure magic. No one, and I mean no one, has ever looked at me that way in my entire life. There is no bond like the bond between mother and baby. I wish I could say I had a good childhood. By the time I graduated high school, I had lived in 13 different homes and went to 13 different schools. My childhood was cruel and mean. I wouldn't wish that life on my worst enemy. A very important skill my childhood failed to teach me was self-worth. My childhood made me believe my value was reliant on others' happiness. I was taught that I had to earn love through hard work, perfection, and sacrifice. I chased perfection my whole life, and I never caught it. I spent majority of my life following that belief system. As a result, I developed a broken internal compass necessary to keep me safe. This lack of self-worth caused me to make a lot of mistakes and hurt a lot of people. But mostly I hurt myself. I could fall in love with a demon and I wouldn't even know it. So when you came along, an entirely new world opened up for me. I was lost and then I was found. Every time I'd admire your face, I saw myself. I'm making it my life's mission to teach you everything I know. I wish a life for you where you know your worth. I wish for you a strong internal compass that leads you to people with integrity and kindness. Your love catapulted me into an unknown world of truth. I threw away my very rosy-colored glasses. I don't see things as I wish them to be anymore. I see things as they are. Because of you, I stand up for myself. I've learned to not accept treatment, relationships, and situations I wouldn't want you to accept. I am a deep well of compassion and empathy. My capacity to love is immense. This is a gift that I'm learning to protect and use properly. Chinan Segyu for helping me find myself, baby. Your preciousness helped me finally recognize my preciousness. I always want you to feel good about yourself and like your own company. If someone mistreats you, I hope you walk away. As your mother, I'm going to try my best to model this for you. Just remember, there is nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, you have to do to be worthy of love. Just by being born and your mere presence in my life changed my entire worldview and life forever. Now that's powerful. Hi. What are you?
I'm a superhero.
Oh, really? Where are you flying to, Supergirl?
I'm flying like a girl on the clouds.
All right. You go, girl. You are so strong. That's right, girlfriend.
Princess. I'm a princess. I'm a princess.
See here, I'm still navigating how to use this. There we go. Yeah, thanks for sharing that with us. There's a lot of points that I think that we could talk about. Why don't you start? What stands out for you, or what does it mean to you, watching this and sharing it with everyone else?
Well, let's see. So I got into social work back in 2011. And I truly believe I got into, oh no, I graduated my social work program in 2011. So it was actually earlier than that. 2000, gosh, I'm getting old. Anyways, I did it. I studied my bachelor's of social work at UAA. And I got into that wanting to change the world. I really do, deeply down in the bottom of my heart and soul. Like, I had a really abusive childhood and I was just so sick and tired of it. Like, so not only like just my childhood, but just like growing up and getting out of my childhood and watching other people repeat these things and myself, especially myself, repeating these behaviors of substance use and all kinds of things that were really unhealthy and harmful to me and other people too. And that's why I wanted to get into social work, because I believed that that was the avenue for healing the world, like because it was focused on healing, right? You know, on on the masses and individuals as well. But um, I really believe that at the bottom of my heart, that's what I want to do, and that's why I got into social work. And I believe that a lot of social workers do it for good reasons and for um, just love for the world. And I also wonder how many social workers are empaths like me,
Hmm.
which is a big part of my story, is how that being extremely empathic and not protecting that caused a lot of harm in my life. And that's, it shares a little bit about that in my story. But um, so I got into social work and I was doing the work, you know, big into policy and voting and um, thinking and truly believing. And I think there's definitely ways to change the world in those avenues for sure. Um, I was doing that and oftentimes feeling like I was running on a mouse wheel, just feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, like there was um, it's a really hard job. We social workers have a very challenging job, you know? And so I was really feeling the weight of that. And then I had my daughter. I became a mom, and then everything changed because I realized, I looked at my daughter and I saw myself every single day, and I realized how much of my life how much of the things I was accepting into my life and doing in my life that I wouldn't want her to do. Um, Things like, you know, um, breaking my boundaries to make other people happy, or working like a dog to uh, in my job, and just trying to make everybody happy, and wanting to change the world. And um, I didn't want her to live that way. I wanted her to look at the world with bright eyes and be happy, and to love and experience love and receive, and not, I'd never wanted, I didn't want my daughter to come out like me in a lot of ways, that she would work so hard to prove herself. Um, and also work so hard to help everybody else to the point to where she was neglecting herself. I really did not want that for her. And I didn't want her to get into unhealthy relationships, which was something I also did majority of my early life. Um, and when I had those realizations, I decided and realized that the most effective and quickest and strongest ways you can change the world is through yourself, through healing your heart, healing your internal space. Um, the quickest and most effective way to change the world is to be a good human and raise good humans. And though
Yeah.
you can do all that external work, you know, with policy or being a therapist, whatever it is, those are great. Um, but they're a lot less effective when you're not healing yourself and focusing on yourself. And I realize, and I know that as a social worker, I know that kids learn by watching. They don't learn by what you tell them, or they don't learn as much. It's a lot more effective to model these things. And so um, that's where it came from for me, was just wanting to, I want my daughter to be happy. And if she wants to change the world, great. But I want her to see that, how to protect herself in that process and be happy.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Again, there's so many points that we could go off on, and I think I just wanted to first off say I just really respect and admire the way that you look at your relationship with your daughter. I think that what happens to, you know, as a social worker and as somebody who's went through problems in my own life, I think what happens to a lot of people is, you know, they go through their own problems as a child or whatever, and they say, you know, they might be thinking like, well, why is this happening to me? Or why do I have to go through this? Is there something wrong with me? Am I cursed? And they think, well, I won't be this way when I grow up. But then, you know, the trials of life take place. You know, you got to go through school, which is all the problems. You got to grow up and be an adult. You got to take on responsibility. You have to work. You have to figure out a way to survive in the world. And I mean, that whole time you're inundated with like advertisements and, you know, influence from peers and television and all these different things. And anyways, I think sometimes that like inner voice we have as a child, it gets lost and muddled up somewhere, and we forget about it, and then we're reactionary, right? We didn't intend to be the way that our parents were, but then, you know, when we're a parent and we're in these situations, and we become overwhelmed and we start becoming reactionary, right? And so I think a lot of people can get caught up in that. And so I think it's really admirable that you were able to, you know, recognize and be deliberate about the way that you want to have a relationship with your daughter and the world, or the way that, you know, provide her an opportunity to grow up in a happy environment where, you know, she can live a fruitful life. I mean, how did you come to that? I mean, I know you talk about that she was born and stuff, but like, what was the process of that, you know, transition or that transformation in the way that you thought about things?
Well, I was in a unhealthy relationship both ways. You know, it wasn't just he was unhealthy. I was unhealthy too. And so I didn't want her to grow up and repeat that. You know, I wanted her to have healthy relationships. So that was the big catalyst for me, was wanting to model a life for her that I wanted her to have herself. And so it's required me to sit in my feelings in a lot of ways, and also set really good boundaries, which was something that was really hard for me. I'm a lover and I love being in relationships. Being single was always really hard for me majority of my life. But because of my daughter, I'm forcing myself. I'm about almost 2 years now single, and I'm really happy. You know, how cool is that? You know, it took me forever to get to a point in my life where I could be single and be like, yes, I love this life, you know? And so I'm here now, and I want my daughter to have that. I want her to feel strong in herself and know that she can be her best friend, you know? And I truly feel something that was making me think when your talking was, I feel like we have like not two souls, but just like two things inside of us. We got our inner child, and then we have like a loving parent. And a lot of us, when we're in our reactivity, our inner child is reacting. So we're not listening to the loving parent that's telling us to, okay, maybe you shouldn't drink that tonight, or maybe, you know, you should, this sounds like this person isn't very good to you. Why are you staying in this relationship? You know, we have those internal dialogues inside of ourselves, and we have both of those things. And I feel like when I've really made a lot of mistakes in my life and did things that I wasn't proud of, it was because my inner child was screaming at the top of her lungs, and all she wanted was love, safety, quiet, peace, you know? And so what I'm trying to do now later in life is like, I listen to that loving parent, and I really think of myself as my daughter sometimes. So when someone is rude to me or harmful to me, I take that very seriously, like almost in a way, like not like of a higher, like a egotistical way, but just like, how dare you? Kind of like how I would react if someone disrespected my daughter. Like, how dare you? Like, and I value myself finally. It took me a really long time to get there. And one thing I'm noticing as I do that, I'm becoming a mirror for other people, because they see me doing these things that are just kind of, I don't know. I'm just loving myself and being kind and things like that. And I think people, sometimes they can put a mirror up to people, and it forces them to look at themselves. And that's what I mean by being a good human, and raising good humans changes the world, is if you are truly being in alignment with your values and your your values. If you're being aligned with your values and taking care of yourself and practicing self-respect and self-love, you become a mirror for people who are maybe still struggling with that, or who for whatever reason, you know, are not doing those things. And so that's how you change the world. That's one of the ways to change the world, so yeah, that's kind of how I got to this point in my journey.
Yeah, there was a thought I wanted to share. When you say that you're a mirror for other people, it reminds me of, I read this. I was in jail a long time ago. I was sitting in jail in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and obviously you read books when you're in jail. And so I was going through the library there, and I came across this book by. It's funny, now she's the presidential candidate, Marianne Williamson. It was a book by her, and then I saw this. She had the same quote that I saw in there that really helped me back in the day. I saw it in a movie. What was it called? Coach Carter. One of the kids comes and recites the poem to her, or to his coach. But it says, I just found it. It says, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You're a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightening about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine, as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It is not just in some of us, it is in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. We are liberated from our own fear, and our presence automatically liberates others." And I really thought about that when you said when you were talking about you're a mirror for other people.
Oh my goodness, yes. And there's going to be people who really are not going to like it. They're really going to dislike it and they're going to reject you. And that's okay. But it's still a great learning lesson for everybody. I don't know why. How this is coming
Yeah.
out. Yeah, that's something I've really worked hard on too, is not dimming my light and being unapologetic about taking up space, because before I used to be like, oh, I don't want to offend anybody. I got to be careful about what I say. I got to do this and that. And I think the reason why I have more confidence doing that now is because I truly try. I try. This is not this is there's I don't think anybody can perfectly do this, but I really try really hard to align my behaviors, thoughts, and feelings with my values. And I value things like integrity. I value things like self-respect. And I'm sure most people do, but putting that into practice and like very, very intentionally. Obviously perfectly, because there's no such thing as perfect ever. But being intentional with those things and trying your hardest every day to do better than yesterday. I don't even know where I'm going with this.
No worries.
But it made me the mirror, yeah. Being able to, what gives me the confidence to do that is truly trying my hardest to live within my values. And I think when I'm not, and I've been in those times where, especially as a clinician, oh my gosh, I don't know how, I hope social workers listening can relate to this, but it's really challenging and painful to help people in our field when we're experiencing the same problems in our own personal life. And I know other clinicians experience this. I know it. I would be very naive to think that was not true. And I've experienced it. And I remember when I was trying to teach from that point of view, it was painful, painful. And later on, I would have so many doubts about how I taught that because I wasn't living it. And so now, because I'm living it, I feel I try. My house is a mess right now as we speak, but I try. But when I try to live in that, I feel so much more confident with what I say now, because my words are meeting up with my actions now, finally. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I like what you say about living your life with based upon values, and so I think this in many things. Whether you're a teacher, a professor, a social worker, a parent, whatever it is, a human being. But I just lost my train of thought, just like you did.
I do that.
I totally lost my train of thought where I was going. Let's go to the chat. We have some comments in the chat. And if you're listening in, feel free to ask a question or share your thoughts in the chat, as well as the call-in feature is open. But David asked a question that's right in line with what we're talking about anyways. He says, what an awesome video. You mentioned that you have spent a lot of your life pursuing perfection and feeling unworthy. How did these challenges affect your early experiences and relationships? And more importantly, how did you overcome them to become the compassionate and empathetic person that you are today?
Ooh, okay, can you repeat that question again? I want to make sure I get it
Yeah,
right.
that's a loaded question, David. He said, you mentioned that you have spent a lot of your life pursuing perfection and feeling unworthy. How did these challenges affect your early experiences and relationships? And more importantly, how did you overcome them to become the compassionate and empathetic person you are today?
So how that impacted me. Oh my gosh. Okay. So in my early relationships in my 20s, I remember thinking this like in my head too, very vividly, was if I'm not perfect, they're not going to love me. My boyfriend, whoever the boyfriend was at the time, like I have to be perfect. I can't be messy. I can't, there were so many things I was trying to be to please, the boyfriend I had at the time. And in a way, it was maybe somewhat inauthentic, but also came from a lot of insecurity, and it was painful to constantly like. Another way it showed up was codependency and fear of being abandoned. So I would, if I didn't hear from a partner that I was dating for a day or half a day, I would just freak out. Like I would be so worried that, okay, they don't love me anymore. They're changing their mind, or they found someone new, all these different, thoughts that come in my head. I'm just like, what the heck? So that's how it showed up when me chasing perfectionism and wanting to make everybody happy. That's how it showed up in my relationship. It showed up as codependency, a lot of focus on the other person, not on myself at all. Like I wanted to become the person that was perfect for the other person, not the person that was perfect for me. And so that's how it showed up early in my relationships. What was the last? Oh, how did I overcome that? I overcame that through my daughter because she was my mirror. And my daughter and my son too. Like my son is especially. He's doing a lot of. He has done so much for me in healing my relationships with men, and my belief systems around men. And so I can't wait to share a story about him one day with a TikTok video. But yeah, my daughter was that mirror for me because I was doing all these things. I was in these relationships where they were really unhealthy, and I was just hurting myself. It was so painful when I think back on all those days. And when my daughter was born, I was like, what am I doing? Do I want her to be like me? No, at the time I didn't. And so that's when it was like boom and everything changed.
Because it's true, we do it, or I shouldn't say we always do, but we can inherit insecurities and whatnot from our own parents. And, I think a couple of the things that you just said now connect to what you were talking about earlier in the show about perfection. And you say that, you learned to not, well, you said you used to think that you had to be perfect in all situations, which is unattainable, right? You're always just going to be seeking that and, eye of the beholder anyways. But then, earlier you mentioned like, your daughter doesn't have to do anything particular to be loved and to be cared for. Just being born, I think is the way that you said it. And, that can be hard. Like I said, even though as parents we might want to, instill those kind of things into our children, it can be hard because like I was saying earlier, you get caught up in the world. Life is hard. It can be stressful. And then, you get caught up in the same patterns that you did as a child or that you witnessed as a child oftentimes. And those relationships manifest themselves over and over again. And like you said, your children are going to learn from observation. And so if they see those things, it's very likely that they're going to inherit some of that and so on. And so it takes us as parents, and it's hard work, right, as a parent to be reflective and to look inwards and to continuously try to change. And like you said, kind of hold yourself accountable by like asking yourself, is this good for my child? Would they appreciate that? How would they look at this? And I often think about, when I was a child and the things that I wanted and needed and I felt I didn't get sometimes. And in the present moment, I have to look at myself as a parent and say, like, you know what, I'm not really living by the principles that, or the standards that I would have wanted as a child, if you know what I'm saying. I am acting like, I mean, maybe not fully like my own parents, but in ways, you know, I'm being reactive, I'm chastising them rather than responding with empathy and, you know, looking them at, seeing their eyes and the spirit within them. I'm just being reactionary. And so kudos to you for, you know, being that reflective parent and seeing yourself in the child and seeing, you know, seeing them in yourself as well. Do you ever have deja vu with your children? Sometimes, especially when they were even littler. For me, mine are, I'm about to have a 6 and a 7-year-old, but she's still 5, and then I have a 4-year-old. And especially when they were really young, I'd have these moments of deja vu where I would like re-experience something from childhood that I'd forgotten about, and it would like teach me lessons, if that makes sense. It would be like, oh, you know, like I'd be able to see myself in them and kind of have a, and it was almost crazy because it was like when they were, you know, before they were at the age of speaking. So I think it really helped me connect with myself and maybe some of the experiences that I had that I was never able to articulate because they were before I developed language or memory and those kind of things. You ever experience anything like that?
That's really cool. Yeah, like deja vu of like seeing your kids doing something and then like remembering a piece of your childhood.
Yeah, it's almost like I remember how I felt. Does that make sense? Like I connect the way that it feels to be in those situations or whatnot.
I think for Christmas is a great memory from like I kind of do this every Christmas is like I watch my kids' faces light up, and it does bring back a positive memory for me because when I was a kid, Christmas was a really good memory for me for the most part. I never had a terrible Christmas. In that way it does definitely brings deja vu, and yeah, for sure. I can totally relate to that. That
Yeah.
definitely, that's, I feel like common and parenting and good. It's so good for our souls. One thing
Yeah.
I love to do with my kids is kind of, in a sense, almost relive my childhood. And there's no way to absolutely do that and completely because I'm not a child. I don't think like a child, but I play with my kids, and that's really fun. And watching them, just their imaginations are so amazing. The things they can think of while we're playing, it's so cool. The thing that I was, I'll lose my train of thought again. Um, oh, I can't remember. I had a brain fart.
No worries. I think you know, parenting's interesting, you know, because oftentimes when people talk about parenting and the things that they have to do, they talk about it as if they're burdened or it's hard. Like even like say something like reading or something. Well, at first, you know, I've always been a huge reader in my own life, and when my kids were really little, like I honestly didn't read to them that much, and it was like kind of like this tedious thing. I had to read this children's book, but over time, like I developed like not only a curiosity for good children's books, but I like, you know, I want to find these good, entertaining books all the way from like a small board book to, you know, a longer one that I read to them now. And so, like you said, going through childhood again, it's just like that for me. You know, I'm enjoying going through those things and, you know, not having to be so serious and enjoying you know, because I've been in academic for so long. Most of the stuff I read is all this serious, you know, scholarly or stuff
Academic
like that. And
journals.
so, what's that?
Academic journals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a pleasure to kind of go through some of those things again, you know, even like old movies or shows. And I realize some of them are garbage and some of them are really deep. And I really appreciate revisiting them. It's really a pleasure to have children around and be able to go through the joy of those things and just, you know, enjoying things just because.
She teaches that our kids teach us how to be in the moment. They teach us, how, I don't know, kids have just a totally different perspective of life. They don't have all these outer influences influencing how they make their decisions, you know, not as much as we do, I guess, as adults. And so I really like to pay attention to that. I feel like they're these little gifts that we get to, you know, these gifts to us as adults to grow and heal.
Yeah. I think one way to look at it too, like if you just took the simple idea of like, say, somebody whose parents didn't play with them as a child, well, then you have kids, you have a chance to, you know, have that experience, maybe in a bit of a different way, but you have an opportunity for that. Take advantage of it.
Yeah.
We have Michelle. I'm going to get to your comments and your question in a minute, but I have Fawn on. She's calling in. She's got a question or she wants to talk to us for a minute. Hi, Fawn.
Hi, Fawn.
We can't hear you.
Uh-oh.
See if we could get it wrong.
This was happening to me too. I was having
Yeah.
computer difficulties this morning.
So when while she's doing this, I'll just talk story for a second. So when I started the podcast, you know, there were obviously technical difficulties to start. For one, like being in Alaska, and I had a lot of rural guests or students from rural areas, and so the internet just was crappy. And so in the program we were using, it was always like the final product was almost embarrassing to me because there'd be all these, you know, it'd be choppy and all these holes in it and whatever. And I've always thought to myself, you know, well, the further I go, the more I do it, the less technical difficulties there's going to be. And so, like, you know, I'm obviously more knowledgeable about the platform. I've switched platforms to Riverside, and there's been a lot of things that have been more seamless. But I still have, no matter what I do, there's always technical difficulties with doing these podcasts via distance. It happens no matter what.
So true. Yep, especially in Alaska.
Yeah. Well, let's go to Michelle's comments and her question, and we'll try to get Fawn back in a minute. Michelle says, "Beautiful story. I relate to a similar past growing up in abusive, oblivious family in Washington and then moving to Alaska to find my survival instincts. There's no greater power you have as a parent than to take what you have survived and teaching others the same, and your daughter can testify to it all. And with that said, if there is one testimony of life experiences, what would you like her to see most continuously from your life of values?"
The number one thing I want my daughter and my son to know is that they are just innately innately beautiful and valuable and worthy. I don't want them to feel like they have to prove themselves consistently, and I want them to have a very strong internal compass. Because when I was stuck in trying to please everybody else, I didn't really have a strong internal compass, because I didn't have a sense of myself, and so it would lead me into not some pretty unhealthy predicaments. And so, yeah. What was that? Can we repeat the question again?
Yeah, what would you like most to continuously see from your life of values in your children?
Just that they're worthy, that they deserve to receive. That's a big thing for me. I'm learning about is it's okay to receive. I don't have to. It's okay to receive. It's okay to sit back. They're valuable. They don't have to do just their mere presence, their personality, their all of that is enough. You know, they don't have to chase degrees and people and status and power. Like, I want them to know that power is within yourself. Those are some things I really want them to know. And also just to be a good human. I want them to be kind, and good to others so that they can be mirrors too.
Thanks, Michelle. And thanks, Michon, for the answer. We've got Fawn back, so let's see if we can get her on here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yay! Okay. I'm gonna leave my camera off, so let's see if that helps.
Okay.
Um, Earlier you talked about, self-care and self-love and taking care of yourself. And that's something that I um am definitely a fan of. Um, but I have had a lot of conflict within when it comes to self-care. Mostly because, in your indigenous communities, growing up in an indigenous family, um, it's a big thing is to take care of everybody, take care of your community, take care of your family, take care of others. And that's a pillar in the majority of indigenous communities. It was a struggle for me to figure out where self-care fit into that view. And then a couple weeks ago, in class, Professor Christian had it was a diagram of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then it had a Blackfoot uh, hierarchy of needs. And that just completely blew my mind. I was like, "Oh my God, this is it! Like this is what I've been needing." And I want to thank you for bringing that to the forefront, because I feel like, you hear a lot about self-care, you hear a lot about self-love from a lot of different people, but I don't hear that from an indigenous perspective as much as I need to. And I think that that is extremely important because, visibility matters. So whenever I read it in a text with the whole Blackfoot hierarchy of needs, so putting yourself first, and then you can help your community. And then from you today, it's just very empowering to hear that from other Native people, that it's okay to take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself in order to take care of other people. And I think that that's extremely important. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate your comments. I totally agree. Yeah. And I hear what you're saying within indigenous communities. We're very communal and we care about each other, and that's a part of our values as Native people. And we're not just one person, we are our whole community. We're all connected. I totally get that and agree with that concept. And there's still a way, though, to love yourself and focus on yourself, um, and still be tied and connected to other people. And I think that you can't. And also, I noticed it in my life personally. I have not been able to do. So I've in the last 2 years, I've really, really stepped up my self care and self love practices, and because of that, I'm noticing I'm more effective in helping others. Um, and I can do a lot more, and I just have so much more energy every day. Mainly because I'm trying really hard to focus on what I'm passionate about and doing work that I'm passionate about. Um, but yeah, there's definitely, and you can't help others without filling your own cup first. You need water in your cup to pour into someone else's. and and what's interesting is I feel like because indigenous values are so communal, that we sometimes, like, I feel like it's just kind of missed that self-respect and self-care is so paramount to that communal environment. Because, and it's interesting because a lot of indigenous studies and research out there are autoethnographies. Like I almost feel like that's our way of decolonizing a little bit, because in a lot of ways, academic research, they want numbers, how many people are in your study and quantity and all of that stuff. And I feel like a lot of indigenous scholars are breaking that by saying, no, my story matters and my story is important and it will help other people. So I'm going to focus on myself. I think a lot of indigenous people are doing that right now. And we're reconnecting with that idea of self-care as the middle piece to the community, that we need to, that part can help us be a better community member.
Yeah. Thanks for the question, Fawn. I think in higher academia, you and I are both PhD students, but I think, on the Western side, I'll just say like, I'm not trying to group everybody into the same thing or anything, but you take like the white Western professor. My experience is when you start talking about autoethnographies and things like that, they're like, oh, well, we frown upon that. But I think the point I'm trying to make is that as the Indigenous Studies program here at UAF is a great example, but there's many others around the country that, we are going back to, we are learning in higher education how to value storytelling and how to value things other than what you said, just like the numbers. That is a way to gain evidence and whatnot, but it's not the only way. And it's not even the best way. Sometimes it might be the best way, but it's not always the best way, and it's definitely not the only way. And so I think that, kudos to these programs in higher academia that are valuing things like autoethnographies, especially from Indigenous authors, Indigenous academics, Indigenous students, Indigenous writers. I just think it's a real testament to the way that things are changing. And, again, even with, besides the written stuff, like we were talking about earlier, the technology and the ability to record and preserve some of these things. And I hope people take advantage of that with the elders, with some of the elders that are still around.
Oh, something I was thinking about too about the self-love. Something that I do with the self-love is I look at self-love in a lot of ways more so as self-respect. Because, like for me, self-love is like, oh my gosh, I get so grumpy when my house is a mess, which it is often. But I get so grumpy when it's messy. So my form of self-love is sometimes I ask myself, do I want the pain of doing the work now so that tomorrow I feel better? Or do I want to, is it better, is the benefit greater to feel the pain of not doing the work now and then potentially feeling the pain later? So I ask myself that a lot. And a big part of my self-care routine is about doing the hard things. If it seems that the benefit of doing the hard things will be a higher benefit than doing the easier things. That's how I try to look at it. I try to look at it as also self-care, self-love, self-respect, self-discipline. Like they all kind of go together into one in my eyes. And sometimes it is, like sometimes I'm just so exhausted. I have to ask myself, okay, the house is a mess. Do I want to clean the house tonight? Or do it tomorrow, and then tonight I can just relax and watch TV because I just don't have the energy. Sometimes it is that. Sometimes that's the answer. But I really weigh it every time, and I think about it. And majority of the time, the discipline thing makes me feel better.
Yeah. I see your comments, David and Michelle, and I'll get to them in just a minute. But I want to stay here for just a minute. So self-care. I just want to contextualize it in a few different ways. So I remember I was a grad student in Hawaii, and it was advanced standing, so I was taking 5 graduate courses, doing an internship. I had a graduate assistant. I had all sorts of stuff going on. I had a new girlfriend who's now my wife. I was busy as hell. And I remember that for one of my classes, and rather than have us go to class, they sent us to a self-care. I can't remember what it was, a conference, but self-care was one of the portions, and we sat in there and we were learning about self-care. And I'd felt this way before, too, at different times I've been in a self-care thing. And I would say to myself, real self-care would be letting me go so that I could actually practice self-care instead of sitting in here and listening about self-care. And I'm not dissing the self-care. I'm not. I was just like oversaturated with it for a long time, and I didn't have any time. And so I'd look at it like, real self-care would be giving me the time to do it. And then like I want to imagine, let's say, licensed clinical social worker, okay? So they're a licensed clinical social worker. They've got student loans. They took this job where they're seeing, 30 clients, 20 to 30 clients a week. They're overwhelmed. Their empathy's being drained. They've got children at home. They've got, whatever, all this stuff going on. They have all these things going on. And they realize, I'm not being as good of a parent as I could be. I'm not being as good of a clinician as I could be because I'm not taking care of myself. And then they think about it and they realize, they think to themselves, I don't even have time to take care of myself. I'm taking care of everyone else and I'm burnt out. Like, what advice would you give to that person? Like, how can they find time or find space, whatever it is, so that they can take care of themselves? Because obviously, just like you've outlined during this entire conversation, that if you take care of yourself, it's a domino effect, and you're going to be able to take care of your children. You're going to be able to take care of everyone else. You're going to set an example for everyone else that's going to liberate them as well. But how do you start that? Because it can seem so daunting and overwhelming, when you're feeling collapsed. Maybe you have, you got to pay the rent and you're not making enough money, so you got to work overtime. I don't know. There's a million ways to look at it. But, what advice would you give to that person? How do you create the time, the space, whatever it is needed, the motivation, the willpower?
So I have a lot of very strong feelings about how our how our clinical social work is, how it is. The expectations of social workers and clinicians are astronomical whenever they're getting their licenses. I mean, once you get your license, you can, get your own private practice. You have a lot more choice and ability to do what you wish to do. But in the process of getting your license, you really just have the community mental health centers in Anchorage to work for. And I'm going to say it. They overwork us, every single one of them. We are overworked. We are undercompensated. Payment is not good enough, the pay that they pay clinicians. 30 clients a week, an hour a session. Are you serious? And then the amount of documentation on top of that? No, that is not okay. It's abusive. Bottom line, it's abusive. I'm not okay with it, and I won't do that ever again. But so it's that, to me, is often how I look at that as a systemic issue. And I think that that's a systemic issue. But if you're in that place and maybe you like it and maybe you can handle the workload, I think that's great. If that's your story, then I think that's wonderful, and I want to support you, and I have nothing against that. But I think if you're overwhelmed with all of the work stuff happening, and you just have so much work happening in your life, then in my opinion, so when I was struggling in that place of being overworked and not getting paid enough and just all those things, my personal life was also chaotic. So that just doubled down on the stress and problems. And I ended up burning out. I ended up quitting my job and quitting my marriage on the same day. And it was like I said, it was like boom, like I had this change. Like all of a sudden I was like, I woke up. It was definitely very spiritual. And so I think that to handle the work, that heavy workload, is to have a really beautiful personal life. And having that beautiful personal life I'm just imagining this. This is not something I experienced, because I have a really good job now that's it's a healthy pace, and I'm not overwhelmed, and it's great. But if you're having a job that is high stress, high demand, then having a soft place to land is so important after work. Soft place, soft people, kind people, finding those people who love and support and uplift you, and thinking very critically about people, and if they're a good match for your energy, and if they're a good match for your community and your relationships. Because if they're causing harm, then that's just more harm you have to burden and handle. So I have a lot of boundaries. If I sense someone may not have the best intentions with me, I'm pretty quick to put some really strong boundaries in front of me and be like, nope, this is where there's where the line draws. And it helps protect me so that I can have more peace of mind. That was just my thought process. So.
No, yeah, I think you paint a beautiful picture, and there is no exact prescription, right? Everybody's lives and situations are differently. What I would say to people is that no matter how closed in you seem, there's always a different way, and it may not. I think one of the things that I've changed as I've grown as a person, I've grown older, but as I've grown as a human being, is that I used to be so impatient. I wanted change to happen, and then when I thought about something that was a year, even a month or something down the road, it was really hard for me to see that. As a matter of fact, if I think back to when I was first an adult, I'd get a job and I'd work it till I got a paycheck, and then I couldn't see really any further than that. So I didn't want to work anymore. I just wanted the paycheck. But as I've gotten older, I've been able to see I'm more patient to let things manifest themselves. And so when I want change, I examine myself and examine my situation. I do a lot of reflection, and I look at the things that I can change. And almost always, I could say, like, almost like, it's hard for me to like quantify it exactly, but if not 100% of the time, nearly 100% of the time, it always works out for me when I put it, may not exactly in the time that I thought it might, or even it almost never happens exactly how I thought it would or how I imagined it. But there's some kind of truth into the way that I imagine it, and it sets things out into the universe, and the change happens, and the change manifests itself over time in my life. And so if you're in those situations, especially if you're younger, try to find the time for patience. Try to look inward, look around and see how you can make subtle changes, which, like we've talked about many times, would be the domino effect and can change things, not in your own life, but in your environment and the things around you over time. If I would have looked at if I could go back in time and show my earlier self like who I would become, even though I'm down on myself sometimes and think I need to achieve more today, I would have been extremely satisfied with how things turned out, and I would have been very happy and a lot to look forward to. And so I have to remember that in the present as well, because it can, like as we're both testament to right now, it's like you've got your licensed clinical social work, you've got your license to practice clinical social work, which I'm sure was a lofty goal for you at one time. Now you're going forward and you're a PhD student, which is a whole nother realm of thing, and you go back to the bottom and you've got to work your way up, but you have to remember, like, you've come so far, right? You've done so much.
That is so true. I don't think I have thought about that actually. That is so true. Yeah, like I never would have imagined sitting on a podcast and, like you said, starting a PhD program, and that's really cool. It's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, well, I think less than 1% of the population has a PhD, and so I think to get to that point, neither of us have it, but at the same time, like, putting in the work to get to that point, it's just a huge monument that includes a testament to tons and tons of work and motivation, and like continuing to push forward. What made you want to go to apply to get a PhD?
Ooh, I love school. So
Me too, actually.
yeah, I through the process of working really tirelessly and things like that. I Where was I going with this? What was your question again?
Why did you decide to get into a doctoral program, get into a PhD? And I think we have David who has another question here, but I'm thinking of David. David's he's going for his bachelor's of social work, cruising right through, but he wants to get his doctorate in social work. But you and I both deviated from social work, right, and went into Indigenous studies. So I'm just wondering, what was your motivation behind it?
Oh, to go into Indigenous studies. Well, what I learned is, so it took me a long time to get here. I'm in my 30s now. So when people tell me they want to start college right after high school, unless I could sense a very strong purpose in them, I'm like, a little bit hesitant, because I studied so many different. I did the social work and the public policy and then social work, but now I'm studying Indigenous, studies, and that came from after doing a lot of the work. I realized I pay attention to what lights me up, right? So the work that when I'm doing work that I feel drained afterwards, and then I have work that I do and I'm like, oh, it's just so uplifting. I could talk for hours about this and I love it and I feel so good and it doesn't feel like work. And so what I was noticing is, being a clinician is not my path. I know that for sure. I loved the experience. It was actually one of the best life experiences I've ever gotten. I feel so much gratitude for being a clinician the time that I did. And what I learned, though, it was just really triggering for me. And challenging in a lot of ways. So in the process of kind of processing that and then paying attention to, well, what does light me up inside? And what lights me up inside is culture, Indigenous people, community, beading, making art, playing with my kids. I was like, those things are what I get excited for. It's not to go to work and sit an hour and, really or go to work every day. Like that wasn't lighting me up inside the way the other things did, like going to culture camps and spending time with elders and beading. And so I decided that from that realization of me observing myself over several years and seeing what feels good and what doesn't, that's what made me decide to go into Indigenous studies, because I know that the work is probably more purpose driven because it feels so good.
Yeah. One of the things, when we're talking about values, when I compare my experience in the Indigenous Studies program here at UAF, which is only 3 classes, but I've been a part of many different programs at this point. So in contrast with, I've been a part of sociology, I've been a part of Department of Education, and obviously social work. And I would say that the biggest difference that I notice is the values as they take place through the curriculum and through class and whatnot. So the very best, if you get a social work degree, the very best parts of a social work degree, in my opinion, are those like dialogic, transformative opportunities where you get, in my case, it was talking circles with Alaska Natives for the most part. But even in other social work programs, right, there's always, at least probably somewhere in there, an opportunity to sit in a circle and talk about things, whether that's a seminar or whatever. And so, but much of my social work education was like taking tests and taking quizzes and sitting and listening to lectures and this and that. And it really didn't have anything to do with like a transformative experience, which I didn't really agree with. And I shouldn't say my entire one, but especially my graduate program and whatnot. And then I think of the Indigenous Studies program, and each one of the courses that I've been a part of, they're dialogic, like everything is about a dialogue. Everything, like literally everything. Even if talking about the readings and stuff, the professor is going to be dialogic with you and with the class, and he or she is going to ask if you, if you have any comments on the reading, if you want to change anything. They're going to share the power in the classroom. And matter of fact, you sit in these classes, and oftentimes the professor is the one who talks the least. They might kind of set the tone, do some housekeeping, add some context, but it's the students that facilitate and do most of the talking. And you often will hear the professor thank the student because they learned from them. You don't often have that in I don't know what you want to call it, a traditional Western classroom or whatever, but it seems to me that the values are different, which brings on a different experience. Other things like bringing elders into the classroom, it's happened several times. But just and even going over values at the beginning of class, right? Like, what are our values? What should the values be for the classroom is always a point of dialogue and discussion as well. So I just feel very appreciative that I've had the opportunity to be a part of something like that, because just so far it's been very transformative. The feedback I've gotten from the professors in the program has been like on a whole nother level than I've gotten in other areas. And so it's just a really meaningful, transformative environment. And I'm the white guy in the classroom, so like for me to say that, I feel like is even more of a testament, because I've been able to go in there and experience it in maybe a different way, but in much, I've been able to go in and be connected in a way that's helped me be a better parent. Like I think about even the class that you and I shared last semester with Dr. Holmes. Like I felt like I was learning things not only about, because it was like an Indigenous pedagogy class, but I was not only learning about school, but I was learning about myself and how to be a better parent from the material we were reading, but also like from the classroom discussions. It was just really an amazing experience.
Oh, it makes me so happy to hear that that's been your experience in Indigenous studies programs and working with Indigenous teachers. That makes me so happy. I wonder if how much of it is related to our Indigenous values of humility and democracy, or I don't know about democracy, but like communal living and being community minded instead of self-absorbed minded. And I think and I wonder if a lot of people dislike the concept of self care because they think it's like selfish. But it's really not. It's actually very much related and a part of being in community and helping others. How cool. I'm so excited that you felt that way in the classes. That makes me so happy. I want more and more non-Native people to take classes and become engaged in Indigenous things and experiences and be a part of our community. That makes me really happy.
Yeah, well, I truly believe with all my heart and my intellect that the only way, I hesitate to say the only, but from my perspective and my experience, the best way to move forward in education and the world, but in education specifically, would be to adopt Indigenous values. I think our education system is, I hope I don't offend anyone, but I think it's bullshit in a lot of ways. Not saying that all teachers are out there. I'm not saying none of that. I'm just saying the way that we do things, it makes zero sense for us as a people, for learning. If we could learn to just sit in a circle and listen to each other from an early age and continue to do that over time, the world would be a much different place. So I'm 110% bought into it.
Awesome.
Let's get back to the chat so we don't ignore these, and these go back to what we were talking about before. But David had a follow-up question. He said, got it. So you mentioned in your letter about teaching your daughter to value herself and build a strong sense of self. That's cool. How do you bring these values into your work, into your job as a social worker, especially when helping people who may have gone through tough times similar to yours?
Interesting. It's how do I bring that? So I think about self-disclosure or work. There's a lot of boundaries in clinical social work. I'm sure people have heard about that and learned about that so far. I don't know, but in clinical social work, there's a lot of boundaries. Like, you don't want to talk about yourself, and oh my gosh, when I first did it, it was so uncomfortable for me because it was very one-sided. There's definitely a power dynamic. You're supposed to not talk about yourself and focus on the other person. And to me, that felt, I know, and I could even imagine being on the other side of that and just feeling, oh, like there's no connection, That was really hard for me. But what I've done, I've learned to do over time is become very selective about what I do share. So it's important to self-disclose and share your story if it's going to be helpful for the person. And it's actually a really great skill to have as a clinical social worker or a social worker in general. Learning to find ways to share story with people that will be helpful. And when I'm working in places like residential centers, like treatment centers, and working in the prison system, I'm very careful about what I say because you don't want to, I guess some of my story, the lack of boundaries can cause them to hold these stories against you or cause conflict. And so I understand the reason for boundaries. But I think it's about finding the most creative and healthy way to share your story without triggering or causing harm or causing trouble in the person's therapy or treatment. So finding the creative ways to do that. And one of the ways I do that is I don't share like triggering content of my story. I share, okay, this happened to me. I had an abusive childhood, but I don't go deep into like the details of my childhood abuse, things like that, like finding the way to share your story that's helpful for everybody. Is that the question he asked? The person asked? Yeah, finding a way to use your story to help others. And I think that doing that through storytelling, but finding the most creative and healthy way to do that. Because you do want boundaries. Those boundaries are so important. So important.
That's probably one of the first things I learned in social before I was even a social work student, boundaries. Because you make mistakes and bad things happen.
Yeah, I'll share one. I was a clinician in a residential treatment center, and I had a client and I was new. I was a baby clinician in this it's a pretty challenging work environment. It's hard. It's hard work. Because there's often, clients will argue with each other. It's a milieu. They live there. There can be lots of problems that happen, and I had to learn how to handle. Sorry, I'm busy. I can't. No, can you go, please?
What?
I'm on live right now in front of people.
Okay. I can sit over there.
Okay, sit over there. Thank you. Sorry.
No worries, no worries.
My dad just showed up at my house.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
That's my dad.
No worries, no worries.
Okay. Where was I going? What were we talking about?
We're talking about how your dad is embarrassing you.
Yes, he's embarrassing me. I love him though so much.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness, I was not expecting that. But
Sunshine, I missed you.
Oh, another huge part of my generational healing is having a really good relationship. I mean, I think so I didn't have a good relationship with my mother. So I don't have that with her. She actually passed away. But my father, I've worked really hard because he's providing space in my life to have a relationship with him, because he tries and he shares his love towards me and he's kind to me. He calls me sunshine. I don't know if you heard that. But he provides a space for me to have a relationship with him. So that's a part of my generational healing too, is healing my relationship with my parents if they're capable and willing. I say that because my mom wasn't. And that's a part of, a big part of my life that I've had to accept and grow through. But it's been really beautiful, actually, experiencing my relationship with my parents, my dad and my stepmom grow. And I've healed so much from that, because that's another parent too. Like, you have your inner parent, but you also have your actual parents that can give you that love and nurturance that you desire.
Yeah, I had Daniel Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate's son on here last fall or last year sometime, and they have a book coming out because they had problems with their relationship while Daniel was growing up, and they've obviously rekindled their relationship and wrote a book together. But they have a new book coming out. It's called Hello Again, and it's all about that. It's about how to, develop a relationship as adults, parent-child relationships when you're both adults, and I think that's a really cool concept because so many people want that, but it can be challenging. It could be a lot of hurdles to overcome and a lot of feelings to get over and things like that. So thanks for sharing your, just the short story that you shared was like heartwarming. I know it sounds kind of cheesy, but I'm serious when I say that. That's just a cool. I'm glad he stopped by.
Thank you. At the expense of my embarrassment. That's okay though. I'm glad it happened too, actually. And I got to share a little bit about that. It was actually really beautiful and healing for my father too, because he didn't get to be a part of some of my childhood because of lots of various reasons. But it's it's been a huge part of my wellness and healing was experiencing his love. And he gets excited to hang out with me. He is just so happy to repair what was lost in my childhood. And that gets me excited. And he's such a good grandpa. He's so good to my kids.
Yeah, well, I could hear the love in his just his voice. He's just joking around, but I could hear it. So that's awesome.
He's a happy dude.
Yeah. All right, we have a couple more questions in the chat. One for you and one for me. It looks like Michelle says, could you expand a little more on being empathetic, the dangers along with damages that those of us who are very empathetic go through, and how to find healing?
Oh, can you repeat that question again?
Yeah, I think if I could summarize it, I think she's saying that for people that are, empaths or very empathetic, because you were talking about that early,
Mm-hmm.
how do you, people that, that have more empathy than most, how do they go through and find healing, even though it can be challenging?
Boundaries. I think having the boundaries and being willing to having boundaries, and for me, having a relationship with myself and sitting with myself, especially in the pain, and not running towards someone else to nurture me, but learning how to nurture myself was a huge part in that, and the healing codependency and healing pain, and yeah.
When Fawn asks me, back to when I was talking about connection with indigenous culture, and she asked me, have I felt the same connection with your own culture? And I don't think it's intentional, but it's a very loaded question for me, and it's something that I've always struggled with, and I've actually improved significantly just in the last couple of years on being able to answer this, because when I think about my culture. I'm not sure what it means. And I think, so I'm a white guy that grew up in Utah. For much of that time, I lived in a little town. Most of my life's been spent in cities, but I spent a good chunk of my childhood in this small town called Morgan, Utah, which for sure influenced the way I think about the world and my values. But it's I don't know the percentage, but it's an LDS Mormon country town, and my family wasn't, so I didn't fit into that. But no doubt about it, Mormon values influenced the way that I still perceive the world in some ways, not always, but some ways, just because I literally grew up in the midst of it. And I think, as an adult now where I am more familiar and have a better idea of what culture means, what is that for me? Is it, because culture is everything from the way you eat your food to the way you think about things and perceive the world to the way you treat others. And there's a million different ways to think about it. And so I am not directly tied to any one point of culture from my history. Obviously, some things have probably made it through without being explicit about it. But when I do genealogy research, I'm all over the place. And so nobody has ever talked to me like, hey, we came from here and this is that. I knew that my last name came from Switzerland. But up until a few years ago, that's all that I knew. And so I look at connected, well, I think I have a kind of a funnier answer, maybe not funny, but a side answer to this is that when I have felt connection with my own culture as far as my family, the one time where I felt extremely connected and it didn't work out for me in the long run is partaking in alcoholism. And so, when I hesitate to talk because I don't want to talk about certain specific people or anything, because my experience has been both good and bad on a wide variety. But in some parts of my family, people drink a lot, and there's a lot of good things that come with that. They have a lot of fun and great times and stuff like that. But when you're a child, you don't really vibe with alcohol very much. And so when I reflect on my childhood, alcohol, caused me a significant amount of distress and for various reasons. But when I became an adult at some point, I became an alcoholic myself, and it was great in a lot of ways. I had a lot of friends. I had, a lot of different girlfriends that I enjoyed being around. And I think most of all, I got to hang out with certain family members that, really didn't look at me in certain ways until I was able to join that. And so I really felt connected to that culture at that time, but it didn't work out for me. I have a different makeup than some people. And, I'm not saying I can't have any, I'm not the type that if I have a drink, then I'm going to, go over the cliff and leave my family. It's not like that at all. But or that I can't, that I don't want to go, I've never wanted to go home and drink every day or anything like that. But when I do drink, I can get unconsciously slammered, and sometimes that's good. But, I have a family, I have kids, I have to wake up with a hangover and I have to deal with life. I got arrested for beating somebody up once. I got a DUI that got dropped. But, I really had to think about those things. And so I had to drop, that's what I mean to say is that I had to give up some parts of culture that I'd grown up with because it just hasn't fit with me. And another aspect would be Mormon culture. I'm not a Mormon. When I think about it logically, I don't, there's a lot of things about Mormons that are very respectful in the way that family oriented, they handle business, they take care of things. But I'm not a part of the religion and of the moral code. And so I've had to revisit that. Another thing would be Christmas and stuff. I'm kind of an anti-capitalist. And so Christmas was, in one sense, a great joy to me in a lot of ways. I got to be around family and whatnot. And in other ways, I don't agree with it. And so I've tried to create my own sense of culture where I combine the things that I've learned. Maybe some of that's from indigenous cultures and some of it's, what other things that I've learned or imagined along the way. And so we celebrate Christmas in my household. But we're very deliberate about it, and we talk about it, and we think about the things that we're doing and why we're doing it. And so it's just not this materialistic thing of getting gifts, and that's the value that it has. And even with Santa Claus, I'm not, and different people have, I'm not dissing anybody's perspective or the way that you do it with your parents. But for me, Santa Claus, I had a mixed relationship as a kid. So speaking with my wife and being deliberate about it, we don't tell our kids that Santa Claus is real, but we still play around with it. You know what I mean? Santa Claus is still a part of things to some degree. he just doesn't come down our chimney and deliver presents, whether the kids are good or bad. They still go see him at the Santa Claus's house and all of that. And so I think when you ask me, like, do I connect with my own culture? I think even though I've done all this work, I still don't know exactly what, like, if I could define that culture. And rather than that, I've tried to, like, take things that are good, because there's many good things. I mentioned, like, alcoholism as a kind of a thing that's held me back. But there are many good things about, like, my family. They have certain values that are extremely beneficial. And so I try to get rid of what doesn't fit, especially for my family and my kids and whatnot. And I try to adapt it and change it and bring in other new things and try to make it work the best we can. We're human and we're not perfect. And I think when I think about my culture, I think it's something that is not fixed, but it's something that I'm developing and working on. And when I've done work on ancestry, like in recent years, I've looked way back, and one of the positive things about being connected to the Mormons is that they take genealogy very seriously. So I can, like, go back to all the relatives from Utah and, like, look back generations upon generations and read their stories. And I'm still learning more and more, and it's really a crazy experience. And so I can also realize and understand some of the negative things about the way that they acted and the way that they thought about things. But they also thought about some things in a way that I respect. And so I try to take what I can and try to learn from the rest and build a new culture, because we're moving into a new world that's much different than anything my ancestors ever went through or even that we go through. Just in my lifetime, in 40 years, I look at, like, as childhood, it's like living in the dark compared to now. Like, I was literally isolated in this small town with no connection, a long distance phone call, I guess. And today, right in your house, just in your phone, in the phones that we carry around, you're connected to everything. And so who knows what the future is going to be like. And so, sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but I try to develop a culture for me and my family the best I can, through learning from the past and taking what works and trying to improve or change or what doesn't work. And, I've talked about talking circles plenty, but talking circles would be one of those things that I've definitely wholly bought into. And it was a process, but an indigenous value that I bought into. And, so in some sense, my kids are very Western, and in other ways, they come into my rural cohort talking circles, which is almost exclusively indigenous, beside me and David, and facilitate or participate in talking circles. We were at the airport one time, and I saw my kids sitting in a circle with some other kids, and I called him over. "What are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm having a talking circle with the kids in the airport." And I thought that was pretty cool, and I think that there's a lot of appropriation and negative things that can come from white folks taking on different, whether it's indigenous or black culture or whatnot, but there's also a lot of positive changes that can come about. And I think about my children, and they're just going to have a whole different experience than I had, because we're deliberate about it and they have so much exposure to different things. But yeah, that was my long-winded answer.
Cool.
David had one more question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, nothing. I was just responding to you. I think it's so amazing that you are thinking intentionally about holidays, and yeah, I can relate to that, especially as a Native person. Like Thanksgiving, oh my goodness, I have to kind of rethink that every year. Like, well, how do I want to celebrate this or not celebrate it or whatever? Yeah.
Yeah. And Fawn made another question about European cultures. And I think it's interesting, because I have, certain paths have taken me down interesting European things. And I think that there's some connections to indigeneity the further back you go, like some similarities in values. It's just all muddled, and it's hard to go back,
A lot of Caucasian cultures, like Scottish and, a lot of European cultures, if you look back to, very far back in history, a lot of them were very tribal.
Yeah.
In the culture, way before, I guess, like medieval times or whatever. But, yeah, I think about that a lot
You can kind of see, white people in America, that there's like some tribalism flowing through their blood, just with the way that they participate in other things like sports and things like that. Although I think it's misguided in some degree, like, corporate sports and whatnot, it does kind of echo certain things, but that's another conversation. Let's follow up with David real quick, and then we'll wrap things up. David's asking about TikTok. He thinks it's cool that you use TikTok and other digital platforms to tell stories and get your message out there. He's curious, how do you use digital media to connect with people and help them heal? And do you think it's an effective way to reach a wider audience? And I just want to add to that is that, I have the podcast, and I'm so busy these days, between a PhD, being a parent, being a professor, doing the podcast, that I really don't have time to mess with it other than like what I'm able to do, recording it and then producing it. But what it really needs is, to be broken up into clips and being distributed through TikTok and whatnot. And so, I recognize that need. And so I'm also curious about that, just for the benefit of this podcast, for example. I think it would, reach a wider audience if I had the ability to clip it out and share it on these, these like TikTok, these other social media platforms. But I'll let you tackle the question.
Oh, I like digital storytelling because it gives me an opportunity to, it's different than like, I guess, sharing a speech or sharing your story in person, because you get a chance to really plan it and think through what you want to say. So your message can be crystal clear as you want it to be, because you have all the time in the world to prep and think about what you are going to say during that digital storytelling experience. And so that's what I really love about it, because I like to really think about what I say, and it's a lot harder to do that when it's more like this, where it's we're talking in a conversation. Whereas digital storytelling, you can tell a whole story and make a production of it, but not like a negative way. But that's what I like about it, and I like. I feel like a big reason for my TikTok, wanting to do everything on TikTok, is because of all of the mentors that helped me get through my dark times on TikTok. And listening to their stories of healing was very motivating for me. And I think it helps people who are a little bit more, what's the word when you're extroverted, introverted? If you're introverted, that's a really great platform. I was in a very introverted place in my life where I wasn't ready to go out into crowds and talk, or even talk in one-on-one settings with my story. But I was able to if I had time to prep and plan, I could put it on the TikTok. Oh, I was also
How do you feel about?
Oh, I really wanted, I can't stop thinking about the one question about how to get, as an empath, how to get through the difficulty. It keeps coming to my head. Do you mind if I share one more thing about that?
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I know it's changing the subject a little bit, but
No worries.
one of the things, a huge part for that for me, was taking my rosy colored glasses off. Because one of the things that empaths do is we see people at their highest version. We don't see them as themselves. We see them as, we often think more highly of people than they actually present, or than they actually are. And we also, I just had these rosy colored glasses on. Like I had a harder time seeing the negative in people, and I would ignore red flags. Like I was what is it, cognitive dissonance, where you're like, your outward reality is completely in contradiction to your internal reality. But because you can turn it off, that realization at the cognitive dissonance, where you believe it's real, but it's not. I don't know how to explain it. For me, it was just being completely honest with myself about what I was seeing in front of me, instead of thinking that the world was unicorns and rainbows, which I think some empaths can be that way. I know in relationships, especially, I would date men, and they would have all these terrible red flags, and I could easily look past them, because I'm like, oh, but there's so much potential, there's so much I could see where they can, how they're powerful, or I can see how because that's just how I am innately. Like, I love people, and I see the best in people, and I think a lot of empaths do that. And so a big part of my healing was taking those glasses off and being real with myself about what I'm really seeing. If I see the red flag, I take it seriously. And another thing I've done too is I don't, it usually just takes one time for someone to harm me, and I'm ready to make I don't like giving multiple chances. 2 chances is enough for me. So when someone is being actively disrespectful towards me, I'm quick to just to end the relationship or set some serious boundaries so that they can't continue to do that. And I've had to do that to parents. I've had to do that to siblings. So it's hard. It's really hard. But it's better that way.
Yeah. How do
Sorry.
you?
Change the subject. I'm so
No, no,
sorry
no,
for talking about culture
no,
and
no.
stuff.
It had me thinking further though. Like when we talk about like having an inner voice or whatnot, and you know, how do you when you recognize things that aren't working or whatnot? How do you experience that, or how would you describe that? Do you have an inner voice? Do you have like something similar to a conscience? Like how do you recognize that, and how do you listen to it?
I pay attention so when I'm engaging with someone, how do they make me feel inside? And I feel it in my body. I pay attention to where I'm feeling it in my body. Like grief is often in our chest, anxiety is in our chest, anger's in our fists. Disgust is surprisingly right here. So if you feel a lot of energy right there, you're feeling disgust. So I pay attention when I'm interacting with someone. How do they make me feel? Do I feel anxious around them? Like, oh my gosh, I got to do this and that, or do I feel? Do they make me feel afraid? Do they, or are they just like a soft place to land? They're just joyous and lovely and kind to me. Like I really think about I trust myself that I'll respect others because I'm trying really hard to behave in ways that are aligned with my values. So I trust myself to treat others with respect and kindness. So I don't have to pay so much attention to how I'm making others feel because I trust myself. And now I actually pay a lot more attention to how others are making me feel. So, and I listen to that and I believe it because the old me would not believe it. Oh, my feelings are not valid, or, I'm just making things up in my head. I'm just making a problem where there isn't one. No, that feeling is valid. I pay attention to it and I take it very seriously. If someone is making me feel a negative feeling, or I'm not them making me, they can't make me feel that way, but me being in their presence, I begin to feel those things. So, I pay attention to red flags. So for instance, I went on a date with someone. I really liked the person. I liked the guy a lot. And, we started texting back and forth, and I asked him the question, would you marry yourself? And he was like, oh boy, I don't know that's a really deep question. And he's like, I don't think so. And he's like, does that make me bad or whatever? And I was like, and I didn't say, no, it does not make you bad, because it doesn't make you bad. And I really appreciated his honesty. 1,000,000%. I was so happy about that. And it did show a lot of his self-awareness in himself, to be honest with me about that. So I really appreciated it, but I didn't go on another date. Little things like that. I pay attention to every single sign. I don't let a single thing slide anymore.
Well, it sounds like a big part of it is that you learn to trust yourself in the way that you feel versus discounting it or thinking that there must be something wrong or some mistake or something like that. It sounds like you've just really learned to listen and to trust yourself.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we're getting on almost 2 hours here, so I think it's a good time to start wrapping things up. It's been a great time to chat with you and get to know you better, Michon. I know we've had class together, and I felt connected to you with the social work and whatnot, but it's been a pleasure learning more about you and your life and your experiences and your thoughts. And obviously, one of the ways that I think you can tell it's a fruitful episode, it's 2 things. I think the time goes by fast and in good conversation, but also, there was so much participation in the chat and folks calling in and whatnot. And so I think that's just a testament that it was a really good conversation. And just from the reflections from everybody, sounds like folks learned a lot. So I'm excited to get this produced and shared with a wider audience. But before we go, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to share any last words you might have.
I just want to say Tanan, for having me. I also feel just so honored and excited. I was so excited. This is the first time I've been asked to speak at anything, so it's like super exciting for me. I feel very grateful. I feel really good about this conversation, and I think it was a really wonderful opportunity. I'm so happy that the social work program is doing a podcast, because I've probably learned a lot more from podcasts than academia even. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm kind of a podcast nerd, podcast addict.
Yeah, different students use it to different degrees or pay attention to the podcast differently. But I think it's great as far as, like, I would have loved it when I was a student, and being able to interact with a variety of different folks, from scholars to practitioners to like Indigenous elders. I think it's a unique opportunity, and so some of the students really take advantage of it, and I think it's been a great thing. And I feel like it's an honor, and we're very privileged to have you join us. You said it's your first time. Well, I'm sure it's not going to be the last, and I would love to have another conversation with you again in the future. So again, thank you very much. Again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. From my family to yours, I hope, I know your children are doing well, but I wish them the best. And, something that I do towards the end of the show quite often is, I've been pushing this term called revolutionary social work for the last little while. And it's used internationally a little bit, but it's really not used in the United States of America. And I view a revolutionary social worker as somebody that kind of challenges the status quo, the way that things are. They're literally, it's written in the literature that I've put through so far, is that it starts with working on yourself from within. You can't make change. You have a lot of things like critical social work or critical theory, where folks are working on and bent on changing the system and decolonization. But revolutionary social work looks inward and as a huge step into that process. And so just the way that you look at the world, the way that you navigate the world as a parent, as a human being, as a social worker, I just really respect you, and I want to just crown you as a revolutionary social worker. If I had a real crown, I would give it to you. But thank you for the work that you do, and just thank you for being a good person. And I think that the world is a better place with you in it. So thank you for giving us your time today, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
Awesome. Tanan.
And thank you to the audience, too, for everybody, for all your contribution. Okay. All right, everyone. Have a great day. Keep being revolutionary, and peace. This episode was recorded live on Saturday, February 17th, 2024. It featured Michon Whiterose, a licensed clinical social worker in Anchorage, Alaska, and it was hosted by Christian A. Stettler, professor of social work at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. You've been listening to The Critical Social Worker, a revolutionary storytelling podcast. Your story, my story, our story. Until next time, keep being revolutionary, everyone. Peace.